They say the cruelest thing about losing your mind is not forgetting who you are, but watching the people you love forget who you used to be. My hands shake as I hold this wedding invitation, the embossed letters blurring through tears I cannot control anymore. And I wonder if my son Daniel remembers the woman who sat beside his hospital bed for 3 days straight when he was 7 years old with pneumonia, who sold her grandmother's jewelry to pay for his college tuition, who taught him how to tie his shoes and ride a bike and be kind to people who cannot defend themselves. I wonder if he remembers the woman who worked 2 jobs for 5 years so he could go to a private high school, who learned how to change the oil in the car by watching YouTube videos because we could not afford a mechanic, who made his Halloween costumes by hand every year, even though I barely knew how to sew. I wonder if he remembers the mother who showed up to every single one of his soccer games, even the ones that were 2 hours away, even the ones on days when I was so tired I could barely stand, even the ones where he sat on the bench the entire time and never got to play. I wonder if he remembers how I held him when his father died, how I was strong for both of us, even though I was breaking into a million pieces inside, how I promised him that we would get through it together, and we did. We survived and we built a life, and I thought that meant something. I wonder if he remembers any of it at all, because yesterday he looked me straight in the eyes and said the words that shattered whatever was left of my fragile heart. "You are too senile for the photos, Mom. We cannot have you ruining our perfect day." Just like that, as if I were nothing more than an embarrassment, a problem to be managed, a broken thing that no longer fits into his carefully curated life. You need to understand something about Alzheimer's disease that the doctors never tell you in those sterile offices with their charts and their sympathetic smiles. It does not just steal your memories like a thief in the night. It steals your dignity first. It steals the way people look at you, the way they talk to you, the way they suddenly start speaking louder and slower as if volume could somehow penetrate the fog in your brain. It steals your place at the dinner table, your role in family decisions, your right to be treated like the person you spent 72 years becoming. It steals the confidence you once had in simple tasks like making coffee or folding laundry or finding your way home from the grocery store. It steals your ability to trust yourself, because when you cannot remember whether you already locked the door or turned off the stove or fed the cat, you start to question everything, every decision, every thought, every feeling. It steals the future you imagined for yourself, the one where you travel and read books and spend time with grandchildren who do not exist because your son decided children were not in his plans. It steals your independence piece by piece until you need someone to remind you to eat, to shower, to take your medication, to get dressed in the morning. And the worst part? The part that keeps me awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering who I am and who I was, and whether there is any difference anymore, is that sometimes you are perfectly aware of everything being taken from you, and you are completely powerless to stop it. You watch yourself disappear like ice melting in the sun, knowing exactly what is happening, but unable to slow it down or change course or hold on to the parts of yourself that are slipping away faster than you can grasp them. I remember the day Daniel told me about the engagement like it was yesterday, though I cannot remember what I had for breakfast this morning, or whether I already took my medication, or if the nurse who comes every afternoon is named Helen or Ellen, or something else entirely. He was so happy, my boy. His face lit up in that way it used to when he was small, and I would surprise him with chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven. I remember that specific smile, the one where his whole face transforms and his eyes crinkle at the corners just like his father's used to do. The smile that makes you feel like you are the most important person in the world because you put it there. He held Sarah's hand, this beautiful young woman with kind eyes who looked at him like he hung the moon and the stars, and he said, "Mom, we want you to be part of everything. We want you there for all of it, the planning and the preparations, and especially the wedding day itself." Those words meant everything to me, everything, because I had been lying awake at night for months, worrying about my place in his life now that my mind was betraying me. I had been rehearsing conversations in my head where I would tell him that I understood if he needed to distance himself from me, that I would not be hurt if he stopped calling as often, that I knew I was becoming a burden and I did not want to drag him down with me. I cried then, happy tears, grateful tears, tears of relief so overwhelming that I could barely breathe, because I had been so afraid that my diagnosis would push me to the margins of his life, that he would be ashamed of his mother, who sometimes forgets names and faces and whether she already told the same story 3 times in one conversation. But he wanted me there. He wanted me involved. He wanted me to be his mother at his wedding, and that felt like a miracle, like a promise that despite everything this disease was taking from me, I would not lose my son. For 6 months, I helped plan that wedding. 6 months of pouring every ounce of energy and focus I had left into making my son's day perfect. I sat through cake tastings even though half the time I could not remember which flavor we had just tried, writing notes on little cards that I would later find in my purse with no memory of having written them. I gave opinions on flower arrangements, on color schemes, on whether the bridesmaids should wear long dresses or short ones, trying so hard to be helpful and engaged, even when my brain felt like it was full of cotton, and every decision seemed impossibly complex. I went to 3 different bridal shops with Sarah to help her find the perfect dress, sitting in those plush chairs meant for mothers of the bride, while she tried on gown after gown, and when she finally found the one that made her cry happy tears, I cried too, because I was so grateful to be part of this moment, so thankful that she wanted me there. I wrote a check for $10,000 from the savings account I had been building for 40 years, money I had set aside by skipping vacations and buying clothes from thrift stores and cutting coupons from the Sunday paper, because I wanted to give my only son the wedding of his dreams. It felt good to contribute something concrete, something that mattered, something that proved I was still capable of taking care of my child, even if I could not always remember what day it was or whether I had already eaten lunch. I sat in Sarah's mother's living room and addressed envelopes in my shaky handwriting, concentrating so hard on forming each letter correctly that my hand cramped and my head ached because I wanted to contribute something meaningful, something that mattered. Each envelope took me twice as long as it should have, my trembling fingers struggling to grip the pen, my eyes straining to read the addresses on the guest list, my brain working overtime to make sure I copied each name and street and city exactly right. But I did it. I addressed over 200 invitations, and I only made 3 mistakes that had to be redone, and I felt proud of myself in a way I had not felt proud in months. And then 3 weeks ago, everything changed in the span of a single dinner that I replay in my mind over and over again, like a movie I cannot stop watching. We were having dinner at their apartment, the 4 of us, Daniel and Sarah and her parents, who had flown in from Seattle to finalize some last-minute details. The apartment smelled like the roast chicken Sarah had made, a recipe she said was her grandmother's, and the table was set with nice dishes and cloth napkins because this was meant to be a special occasion, a celebration of family coming together. I was trying so hard to keep up with the conversation, to nod at the right moments and laugh at the appropriate jokes, but my mind kept wandering to places I could not control, slipping away like water through my fingers no matter how hard I tried to hold on. They were talking about the seating chart, about which relatives should sit near the dance floor, and which ones should be positioned closer to the bar, and I was contributing when I could, offering suggestions based on family dynamics I still remembered even if I could not remember what year it was or who the current president was. I told a story about Daniel's father, about our wedding day 45 years ago, about how it rained so hard that the tent nearly collapsed, but we danced anyway in our soaking wet clothes because we were too happy to care. It was a beautiful memory, one of the few that still comes to me clearly and completely, vivid and alive in a way that recent memories never are anymore. I could see my husband's face as clearly as if he were standing right there in the room with us, could hear the sound of the rain pounding on the canvas roof, could feel the weight of my wet dress clinging to my legs as we spun across the makeshift dance floor. I wanted to share it because weddings make me think of my own wedding and the man I loved who is no longer here to hold my hand through this terrible journey. Because I wanted Daniel and Sarah to know that the imperfect moments are sometimes the ones you remember most clearly, the ones that become the stories you tell for the rest of your life. But apparently, I had already told that story, twice, at the same dinner. Sarah's father gave me this look, this pitying, uncomfortable look that I have learned to recognize anywhere, the look that says, "Poor thing, she has no idea what she is doing," the look that makes you feel small and broken and less than human. His wife touched his arm gently, a gesture that was meant to remind him to be kind, but only made the moment more excruciating because it confirmed that yes, I was the problem at this table, the person who needed to be handled with kid gloves and patient tolerance. Daniel's jaw tightened in that way it does when he is embarrassed, when something is not going according to his plan, when the reality of his life does not match up with the image he wants to project to the world. I saw him glance at Sarah's parents, saw the apology in his eyes, the silent communication that said, "I am sorry my mother is like this. Please forgive her." Please do not judge me based on her failures. And Sarah, sweet Sarah, who had always been so patient with me, who had held my hand at the bridal shop and called me Mom with what seemed like genuine affection, touched my hand gently and said, "Maybe we should talk about something else." And I realized with horrible, crushing clarity that I had become the problem at the table, the broken record that everyone had to politely endure, the embarrassing relative that people whisper about in corners and make excuses for to their friends. After dinner, when Sarah's parents had left and I was gathering my purse to call a cab because I cannot drive anymore, another small death in the long series of losses that define this disease, another piece of independence stripped away because apparently I ran 3 red lights in 1 week and did not even realize it. I overheard Daniel and Sarah talking in the kitchen. They thought I was in the bathroom. They thought I could not hear. They thought the running water and the closed door were enough to keep their conversation private. But I heard every single word, and each one landed like a stone in my chest, heavy and sharp and impossible to dislodge. "I do not know if we can trust her on the wedding day," Daniel said, his voice tight with frustration and something else, something that sounded like resentment, like he was angry at me for having this disease, for not being the mother he needed me to be, for failing him in this fundamental way. What if she has an episode? What if she starts repeating herself in front of everyone? What if she gets confused during the ceremony? What if she does something embarrassing and people remember our wedding for all the wrong reasons? My future daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into my heart and my family, the woman I had cried happy tears over when Daniel first brought her home, said something about having a backup plan, about making sure I had a handler, someone whose job it would be to watch me and intervene if I started to behave inappropriately. And that word, handler, like I was some kind of animal that needed to be controlled, like I was a dog that might bite the guests or a horse that might bolt during the ceremony, made something inside me break apart into pieces so small I knew I would never be able to put them back together. I left without saying goodbye that night. I could not bear to walk back into that kitchen and pretend I had not heard, could not bear to hug my son and wish him sweet dreams knowing what he really thought of me, knowing that I had become such a burden that he needed a backup plan to manage me at his own wedding. I went home to my small apartment with its labels on every drawer and cabinet, the notes I leave myself about what day it is and what pills to take and whether I have already eaten lunch, the photographs on the wall with names written underneath them so I can remember who these people are and why they matter to me. And I cried until there were no tears left, until my body was empty and hollow and aching. I cried for the mother I used to be, the one who was capable and strong and reliable, the one who could solve any problem and fix any mistake and make everything better with a hug and a kind word. I cried for the woman my husband married, the one who could remember anniversaries and birthdays and the names of all our neighbors, the one whose brain worked the way it was supposed to work. I cried for the grandmother I would never become because Daniel and Sarah had decided months ago that children were not in their plans, that they wanted to travel and build careers and enjoy their freedom, and while I respected their choice, I also mourned it, because I had imagined holding grandchildren and reading them stories and being someone they could count on. I cried for all the versions of myself that this disease has already killed, and all the ones it will kill tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, until there is nothing left but a shell that does not recognize its own reflection, a body still breathing but a mind completely gone. But somewhere in that darkness, somewhere between the grief and the rage and the overwhelming sense of being erased from my own life, something else emerged, a clarity I had not felt in months, a certainty that cut through the fog like a blade of pure light, a voice inside me that was still mine, still strong, still capable of knowing right from wrong and choosing which side I wanted to be on. I realized that I still had choices, that I still had power, that I still had agency over my own story, even if I could not control the ending. I realized that Alzheimer's might be stealing my memories, but it had not stolen my will, had not stolen my sense of justice, had not stolen my ability to stand up for myself when someone tried to erase me from their life. And I made a decision that would change everything, a decision that scared me and thrilled me in equal measure because I had spent my entire life being the good mother, the accommodating mother, the mother who put everyone else's needs before her own. And I was about to do something selfish and petty and completely justified. I was about to take back my power in the only way I had left. The next day, Daniel called to apologize, his voice careful and measured like he was talking to a child who needed to be managed, like he had rehearsed what he was going to say and was determined to get through it without upsetting me further. He said he was sorry if I overheard anything that upset me, sorry if there was a misunderstanding, sorry if I felt hurt by something that was taken out of context, and every single one of those apologies was wrapped in qualifiers that made it clear he was not actually sorry for what he said, but sorry that I heard it. I wanted to scream that there was no misunderstanding, that I heard exactly what he said and exactly what he meant, that my brain might be failing but my ears worked just fine, and I understood perfectly that he saw me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. But I stayed quiet. I listened to him talk about how stressful wedding planning was, how everyone was on edge, how he did not mean anything by it, and of course I was still welcome at the wedding. I listened to him dig himself deeper with every word, making excuses and minimizing and doing everything except actually acknowledging that what he said was cruel and hurtful and wrong. And when he asked if I was still planning to attend the wedding, if I was still excited to be part of his special day, I said yes in the steadiest voice I could manage, because I needed him to believe that everything was fine, that I had forgotten the conversation in the kitchen just like I forget so many other things, that I was still the compliant, easy mother who would go along with whatever he needed me to do. 3 days before the wedding, I went to the bank. The journey itself was an ordeal, a testament to how much of my independence this disease has already stolen from me. It took me 2 hours to get there because I had to take 3 different buses, and I got confused twice, and had to ask strangers for directions, feeling their eyes on me with that mixture of concern and discomfort that I know so well now, seeing them calculate whether I was safe to be out alone or whether they should call someone to come get me. One kind woman with a baby in a stroller walked me 2 blocks out of her way to make sure I found the right bus stop, and I thanked her with tears in my eyes because kindness from strangers sometimes hurts more than cruelty from family, because it reminds you of what you have lost, of the people who should be helping you but are not. But I made it. I walked through those heavy glass doors with my head held high, determined to do this one thing for myself, to take back some small measure of control. I sat across from the banker, a young woman with a nameplate that said Jennifer or Jessica or something with a J, her makeup perfect and her suit crisp and her whole life ahead of her in a way that mine no longer is. And I withdrew the $10,000 I had given Daniel for the wedding. I also withdrew another $15,000 from my savings, money I had been holding on to for emergencies, for medical bills, for the inevitable day when I would need more care than I could provide for myself, for the nursing home I would probably end up in when my mind deteriorated past the point where I could live alone safely. The banker asked if I was sure, if everything was all right, her perfectly manicured fingers hovering over the keyboard as she studied my face with professional concern that barely masked her suspicion. I could see in her eyes that she was wondering if I was being scammed, if someone was taking advantage of this confused old woman who probably should not be making financial decisions without a guardian present, if she should flag this transaction and call my emergency contact to make sure I knew what I was doing. She asked me what the money was for, trying to sound casual, but clearly following some protocol for protecting vulnerable customers from themselves or from predators who target the elderly and confused. And I smiled at her, the brightest smile I could manufacture, the smile I had perfected over months of pretending everything was fine when everything was falling apart. And I said, I am buying a car, a beautiful red convertible, something I have always wanted, and the lie came out so smoothly that I almost believed it myself. I could picture it as I spoke, this imaginary car with the top down and the wind in my hair, me driving down a coastal highway with no destination in mind and no one to answer to, free in a way I have not been free in years. She seemed to relax at that, seemed to accept that yes, an old woman with Alzheimer's buying a sports car was eccentric, but not necessarily a sign of financial exploitation. She processed the withdrawal, counted out the bills twice with practiced efficiency, and handed them to me in a manila envelope that felt heavy with possibility and revenge, and something that might have been freedom. 2 days before the wedding, Daniel called again. This time his voice had an edge to it, a tension that told me something was wrong before he even said the words, a sharpness that reminded me of his father when he was about to deliver bad news and was trying to work up the courage to just say it. Mom, he said, and there was a pause that stretched on too long, a silence filled with all the things he did not want to say but knew he had to say anyway. We need to talk about the wedding day, about your role, about what would be best for everyone. And I knew what was coming. I knew it in my bones, in the place where a mother's intuition lives, even when her mind is falling apart, in the part of me that has always been able to read my son, even when he thought he was hiding his feelings. He was going to uninvite me. He was going to tell me I could not come. He was going to erase me from the most important day of his life because I was an embarrassment, a liability, a problem that needed to be solved, and the solution was to simply pretend I did not exist. Before you continue, I need you to know something. I need you to understand that you are not alone in this. If you are watching this because someone you love is slipping away into the fog of Alzheimer's, if you are watching because you yourself are fighting this battle every single day, if you are watching because you have felt the sting of being dismissed and diminished and treated like you are already gone, I see you. I hear you. Your pain is real and your fear is valid and your anger is justified. Leave a comment right now and write these exact words. I am still here. I still matter. Copy and paste that phrase, because when you do, you are telling yourself the truth that the world sometimes forgets. You are telling the thousands of other people watching this that they are not alone in their struggle. You are creating a community of people who refuse to be erased, who refuse to disappear quietly, who refuse to accept that their dignity has an expiration date. Write it now. I am still here. I still matter. Let your voice be heard. Daniel said the words I had been dreading, the words that confirmed every fear I had about becoming disposable, about losing my value as a person when my brain stopped working the way it was supposed to. Mom, we think it would be better if you did not come to the ceremony itself. You can come to the reception maybe, for a little while, but the actual wedding, the photos, the important parts, we think it would be less stressful for everyone if you sat this one out. He used the word everyone, but we both knew he meant himself. He meant Sarah. He meant Sarah's parents who had flown across the country and were paying for half of everything and did not want to deal with the spectacle of a confused old woman who might not remember where she is or why she is there. He meant the photographer they had spent $3,000 on, who needed perfect shots without any disruptions or distractions. He meant the 200 guests who had traveled from all over the country and deserved a beautiful ceremony unmarred by the unpredictability of someone whose brain could malfunction at any moment. We are worried about you, he said, and the lie was so transparent, so insulting that I almost laughed, a bitter sound that would have given away everything I was feeling. This is not about protecting me. This is about protecting himself from the embarrassment of having a mother whose brain is betraying her, about maintaining the illusion of perfection he needs to present to the world, about erasing the messy reality of who his family actually is in favor of the fantasy of who he wishes we were. I asked him a question then, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest, despite the fact that I could feel my heart breaking into pieces that would never fit back together the same way. Do you remember the night you called me from college, sophomore year, when you had failed 2 midterms and were thinking about dropping out? Do you remember how I drove 4 hours through a snowstorm to get to you? How the roads were so bad that I could barely see 10 feet in front of the car? How I white-knuckled the steering wheel the entire way because I was terrified, but I was more terrified of what might happen if I did not get to you. Do you remember how I sat with you in your dorm room until 3 a.m. talking about resilience and second chances and the importance of not giving up when things get hard? How I held you while you cried about feeling like a failure? How I reminded you of every obstacle you had already overcome in your life? He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Of course I remember, Mom, but I do not see what that has to do with anything." And his voice had this dismissive quality that told me he had already compartmentalized that memory, had already filed it away under ancient history, things that happened before his mother became a problem. And that was when I knew for certain that he had already made his choice, that he had already decided I was disposable, that the woman who had given him everything had become nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed and minimized, and if possible, eliminated entirely from the narrative of his perfect life. I told him I understood. I told him I would respect his wishes. I told him I loved him and I hoped he had a beautiful wedding day, and each word felt like swallowing glass. sharp and painful and necessary. And then I hung up the phone before he could hear the tremor in my voice, before he could detect the rage building inside me like a storm, before I said something I could never take back. I sat there in my small living room with its labels and notes and photographs, and I felt something inside me that I had not felt in years, something I thought this disease had taken from me along with so much else. Not sadness, not grief, but a cold, crystalline anger that burned away the fog and left me with perfect clarity about what I needed to do next. A fury so pure and focused that it felt almost like joy, like freedom, like the last gasp of the person I used to be before Alzheimer's started erasing her piece by piece. The day of the wedding arrived, a gorgeous Saturday in June with clear blue skies and the kind of golden sunshine that makes everything look like it belongs in a fairy tale. The kind of day that people pay extra for when they are booking their wedding venues. The kind of day that mocks you when your heart is breaking. Daniel had sent me a text message the night before, just a brief note saying he loved me and he was sorry, and he hoped I understood. 3 lies wrapped up in a neat little package that he could point to later as evidence that he had tried, that he had reached out, that he was not the villain in this story. I did not respond because there was nothing left to say, no words that could bridge the gap that had opened up between us, no explanation that would make sense to someone who had already decided that his mother's dignity was worth less than a perfect wedding photograph. I got dressed that morning in my favorite blue dress, the one I wore to Daniel's college graduation, the one that still fit even though I had lost so much weight in the past year, because sometimes I forget to eat, and sometimes I eat the same meal twice without realizing it. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I saw someone I had almost forgotten existed. Not the confused old woman with trembling hands and vacant eyes that I saw most days. Not the broken thing that needed labels and notes and constant supervision, but a woman with steel in her spine. A woman who refused to be dismissed. A woman who still had fight left in her even if her memory was full of holes and getting emptier by the day. I did not go to the wedding. I did not stand outside the church watching through the windows like some ghost haunting her own son's happiness, like the pathetic figure I am sure he imagined I would become, desperately trying to catch glimpses of the celebration I was not allowed to be part of. I went somewhere much more important. I went to my lawyer's office, the same lawyer who had handled my husband's estate when he passed away, who knew me when I was still sharp and capable and making sound decisions without anyone questioning my judgment. I sat in his office with its leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling law books and the smell of old paper and furniture polish, and I made some changes to my will. I removed Daniel as my primary beneficiary, struck his name from every single page where it appeared, and each stroke of the pen felt like taking back a piece of myself. I redirected everything to charities that support Alzheimer's research and care facilities for elderly people who have nowhere else to go and no one left to fight for them, organizations that treat people like me with the dignity and respect that my own son could not manage to provide. My house, my savings, my life insurance policy, everything I had been planning to leave to my son who I thought would take care of me in my final years, all of it gone to organizations that actually value human dignity regardless of mental capacity, places that understand that a person's worth is not determined by whether their brain functions the way it used to function. Then I went home and I waited. I knew the wedding had cost close to $50,000. I knew that Daniel and Sarah had budgeted carefully, that they had stretched themselves thin to create their perfect day, that they had been counting on contributions from family members to make it all work, that they had probably maxed out credit cards and taken out loans and made promises to vendors based on money they expected to have. I knew that the $10,000 I had given them months ago had already been spent, allocated to the photographer and the florist and the band, deposits that were non-refundable, commitments that could not be undone. I knew that when I withdrew that money 3 days before the wedding, they had probably panicked, probably scrambled to figure out how to cover the shortfall, probably had frantic conversations with Sarah's parents about whether they could help, probably looked at their bank accounts and felt their perfect day crumbling around them. And I felt no guilt. None. Only a savage satisfaction that they were finally facing a consequence, finally understanding that treating people as disposable has a cost, finally learning that you cannot erase someone from your life without losing something valuable in return. My phone rang at 11:30 that night. Daniel's name flashed on the screen, but I did not answer, just watched it light up and vibrate on my kitchen table like an angry insect demanding my attention. He called again at midnight, again at 1 in the morning, again and again until the voicemail box was full. He left voicemails, his voice progressing from confused to angry to desperate with each message, a symphony of panic that I listened to with cold satisfaction. "Mom, what is going on? Mom?" The check bounced. "Mom, we need that money. The vendors are threatening to cancel. Sarah is crying. Her parents are furious. Mom, please call me back. I do not understand what happened. There must be some mistake. Mom, this is not funny. You are ruining everything. You have to fix this right now." I listened to every single message, and I felt nothing but a strange sense of peace. The peace that comes from finally standing up for yourself after a lifetime of being pushed down. The peace that comes from knowing that you are no longer the one being hurt, that you have finally managed to make someone else feel even a fraction of the pain they made you feel. He showed up at my apartment the next morning, still in his tuxedo pants and wrinkled white shirt, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck like a noose, his hair disheveled and his eyes red from lack of sleep or maybe from crying. I could not tell which, and I did not particularly care. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight, like the weight of what he had done, and what I had done in response, had pressed down on him until something inside him broke. He pounded on my door and shouted my name, and I almost did not let him in, almost let him stand there in the hallway making a scene for the neighbors to witness, adding public humiliation to his private shame. But eventually I opened the door and I looked at my son, my beautiful boy who I had loved more than my own life, who I had sacrificed everything for, who I had thought would be there for me when I needed him most, and I saw a stranger wearing his face, someone I did not recognize even though I could still remember the day he was born, could still feel the weight of him in my arms, could still picture every version of him from infant to child to teenager to man. He demanded to know where the money went. He accused me of being confused, of making a mistake, of not understanding what I had done, throwing my diagnosis in my face like a weapon, using my disease as an excuse to dismiss my agency and my choices and my right to control my own money. He said I had ruined his wedding, humiliated him in front of Sarah's family, destroyed the most important day of his life, made him look like a fool, created problems that would take years to fix. He said they had to borrow from Sarah's parents at the last minute, that they were now in debt to the tune of $15,000, that the wedding they had was not the wedding they had planned because they had to cut corners and make compromises and settle for less than they deserved, and I let him talk. I let him rage and accuse and blame because I wanted him to get it all out, wanted him to show me exactly who he had become when he thought I was too far gone to notice or care, wanted to see if there was any part of the son I raised still left inside this angry, entitled man who thought the world owed him a perfect wedding day. When he finally ran out of words, when he stood there breathing hard and looking at me like I was the villain in his story, like I was the one who had done something unforgivable, I spoke. My voice was calm, calmer than it had been in months, and every word came out clear and precise like my brain had decided to give me one final gift of absolute clarity, like all the fog had lifted just long enough for me to say what needed to be said. I told him I withdrew the money on purpose. I told him it was not a mistake or confusion or some symptom of my disease. I told him I did it because he uninvited me from his wedding, because he called me too senile for the photos, because he treated me like I was already dead and just waiting for my body to catch up with my mind. I told him that I had given him everything, sacrificed everything, loved him with every piece of my broken heart, and he had repaid me by erasing me from the most important day of his life, as if I had never existed, as if the woman who raised him and supported him and gave up everything for him did not deserve to witness his happiness because she might be slightly imperfect in front of his guests. Daniel's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, anger flashing hot and then cooling to something that looked almost like understanding, and then something that might have been shame, though it was gone too quickly for me to be sure, replaced by defensiveness and rationalization, and all the ways we protect ourselves from acknowledging the harm we have caused. He tried to argue. He tried to explain that he was just trying to protect me, that he did not want me to be uncomfortable, that it was all coming from a place of love, using the word love like it was a magic spell that could undo the hurt, like good intentions could erase cruel actions. And I laughed, a sound that surprised both of us, because the absurdity of it all was suddenly too much to bear, too ridiculous to process without some kind of release. You do not protect someone by excluding them, I said, and my voice was still steady, still clear, still speaking truths that he needed to hear even if he was not ready to hear them. You do not love someone by treating them like they are already gone, by deciding that your comfort is more important than their dignity, by choosing a perfect photograph over a real relationship with a real human being who happens to be imperfect. He asked me what I expected him to do now. How was he supposed to pay for the wedding? How was he supposed to explain to Sarah and her parents that his mother had sabotaged everything? How was he supposed to move forward with this debt hanging over him? And the questions were all about him, all about his problems, all about his inconvenience, with not a single word of apology for what he had done to me, not a single acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he had played a role in creating this situation. And I told him the truth that I had been holding on to for 3 days like a weapon waiting to be deployed, the truth that I knew would hurt him more than anything else I could possibly say. I told him that the money was gone, spent on legal fees and charitable donations, given to organizations that would use it to help people like me instead of funding a party that I was not allowed to attend. I told him there was nothing he could do to get it back, that this was not a negotiation or a misunderstanding that could be resolved with apologies and promises. I told him that he was an adult now, that he had made his choices, and that choices have consequences even when they are dressed up in the language of concern and protection, even when you convince yourself that you are doing the right thing, even when you prioritize your own comfort over someone else's humanity. What Daniel did not know, what he could not have known because I had not told anyone, was that 6 months ago my neurologist had given me a different kind of news, not about my Alzheimer's, though that was progressing right on schedule, stealing pieces of me day by day like the tide erasing footprints in the sand, taking memories and abilities and recognitions one at a time, until soon there would be nothing left but a blank shore. No, this news was about something else entirely. A mass in my left lung that had been growing silently while I was focused on the deterioration of my mind, a shadow on the X-ray that the doctor pointed to with grave concern. Stage 4, inoperable. 6 months to a year if I was lucky, less if I was not. Lung cancer, probably from all those years working in the textile factory when I was young, breathing in fibers and chemicals because we needed the money, and workplace safety was not something anyone worried about back then. The doctor said it with such kindness, such gentle sympathy, as if delivering one terminal diagnosis to someone who already has another makes the second one somehow easier to bear. I had a choice when I got that diagnosis. I could tell Daniel. I could tell him that his mother was dying twice over, that he was going to lose me to cancer long before the Alzheimer's took everything that made me who I am, that his time with a mother who could still recognize him and remember his name and have coherent conversations was measured in months, not years. I could watch him struggle with guilt and grief, and the impossible burden of caring for someone who is disappearing in 2 directions at once, whose body is failing as fast as her mind. I could give him the opportunity to step up, to be the son I raised him to be, to show me that despite everything, love could triumph over fear and embarrassment and inconvenience. Or I could keep it to myself. I could spare him that pain, at least temporarily. I could let him go on planning his wedding and building his future, and believing that he still had time to make things right with me someday when it was more convenient, when I was less of an embarrassment, when my disease had progressed far enough that I would not remember being excluded from his special day anyway. I chose to keep it to myself, not out of kindness, not out of some noble desire to protect him from pain, not because I am a martyr or a saint or someone who puts others before herself even in the face of death, but because I knew, even then, that he would not rise to the occasion. I knew that if I told him I was dying, he would perform the appropriate grief, make the appropriate gestures, maybe even visit more often for a few weeks, and then go right back to planning his perfect wedding where his sick mother had no place, where her presence would be a reminder of mortality and imperfection, and all the things people do not want to think about when they are celebrating the beginning of forever. And I was right. The way he looked at me when he uninvited me from his wedding, the casual cruelty of it, the complete absence of empathy or recognition of everything I had sacrificed for him, the ease with which he erased me from the most important day of his life, it confirmed what I had suspected all along. He did not see me as a person anymore. He saw me as a problem, a burden, an inconvenience that he could eliminate with a phone call and some carefully chosen words about what would be best for everyone. Standing there in my small apartment with my son demanding answers and apologies, and the money he felt entitled to, money that was mine, money that I had earned and saved, and had every right to spend however I chose, I made another choice. I decided not to tell him about the cancer. Not now. Not ever. Not until it was too late for it to matter. Too late for him to pretend he cared. Too late for him to assuage his guilt with visits to my hospice bed. Let him find out when I am gone. When it is too late for deathbed reconciliations and tearful apologies, and all the meaningless gestures people make when they realize they have run out of time to fix their mistakes, when they understand that some wounds cannot be healed with flowers and tears and promises to do better. Let him carry that weight for the rest of his life. The knowledge that his mother died alone because he could not see past his own embarrassment long enough to love her the way she deserved to be loved. The knowledge that he had months to make things right, and he chose instead to protect his perfect image. He left my apartment that day, and I have not heard from him since. No calls, no text messages, no apologies or explanations or attempts to repair what has been shattered between us into pieces too small to ever put back together. And I am okay with that. More than okay. I am at peace with it in a way that surprises me, in a way that feels like its own kind of victory, because I spent 72 years being the person everyone needed me to be, accommodating and understanding and always putting others first, always making myself smaller so that others could be bigger, always swallowing my pain so that others would not have to witness my struggle, and I am spending whatever time I have left being the person I need to be for myself, strong, uncompromising, unwilling to accept less than I deserve, simply because my brain is forgetting how to hold on to the present, simply because I am sick, simply because society has decided that elderly people with failing minds should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity we are thrown. The wedding happened, obviously. Daniel and Sarah figured it out somehow, found a way to make it work, even without the money I had promised them, even with the financial hole I had deliberately created. Maybe they borrowed money from Sarah's parents and are now paying it back with interest and resentment, making monthly payments that remind them every single time that their perfect day came with strings attached. Maybe they scaled back their plans at the last minute, had fewer flowers and a cheaper photographer and a band instead of the orchestra they had wanted, made 100 small compromises that probably felt like failures. Maybe Sarah's parents covered the shortfall with the quiet resentment that comes from bailing out your new son-in-law before the marriage has even begun, with the knowledge that their daughter's husband comes with a mother who is unpredictable and difficult and capable of sabotage. I do not know, and I do not care. What I know is that I was not in the photos. I was not in the ceremony. I was not there to watch my only child promise forever to someone he loves while erasing the person who loved him first and longest and most completely, while pretending that the woman who gave birth to him and raised him did not exist, or at least did not matter enough to include. And here is the thing about Alzheimer's that nobody tells you, the thing that the doctors with their clipboards and their diagnostic criteria never mention. Sometimes it gives you unexpected gifts. Sometimes in the middle of forgetting your own address or your neighbor's name, or whether you already took your pills this morning, you remember with perfect clarity the things that actually matter. You remember the feeling of your newborn son in your arms for the first time, the weight of him, the way he smelled like powder and possibility. You remember the sound of your husband's laugh, the way it filled up a room and made everyone else want to laugh too. You remember the moment you realized that love is not something you fall into, but something you choose every single day. And you remember all the days you chose it even when it was hard, even when it cost you everything you had. I remember all of it now, sitting here in this apartment surrounded by labels and notes, and the architecture of a life designed to help a failing mind navigate a world that has become foreign and strange. I remember every sacrifice I made for Daniel, every time I went without so he could have more, every dream I deferred so his could come true, every piece of myself I gave away freely and gladly, because that is what mothers do, that is what love looks like, and I never once asked for anything in return except to be seen, to be valued, to be remembered as more than the disease that is consuming me. If you have stayed with me this far, if you have listened to this story and felt something shift inside your chest, I want you to do something for me. I want you to subscribe to this channel. Not because I am trying to build an audience or create some kind of following, but because this is a place where stories like mine get told. This is a space where people who are losing themselves piece by piece can come and feel seen. This is a community of people who understand that dignity does not have an expiration date, that value is not determined by cognitive function, that love is supposed to mean showing up even when it is uncomfortable and inconvenient and messy. When you subscribe, you are saying that these stories matter. You are saying that we matter. You are saying that you refuse to let people like me disappear quietly into the fog without anyone bearing witness to who we were and who we still are, despite everything this disease has taken from us. But here is what I need you to understand, the part of this story that changes everything, the truth that I have been building toward since the very first word. I am not telling you this story because I want your pity. I am not telling you this story because I need you to take my side, or condemn my son, or validate my choices. I am telling you this story because 6 weeks after the wedding that I was not invited to attend, I am sitting in a hospice room waiting to die, and the nurses here have been kinder to me in 6 weeks than my own son was in the last year of our relationship. They brush my hair and hold my hand and talk to me like I am still a person, even on the days when I cannot remember their names, or why I am here, or what is happening to my body. 3 days ago, Daniel came to visit me. Someone must have told him I was here, that his mother was in hospice, that the end was coming faster than anyone expected. He walked into my room, and he looked older somehow, like the weight of the last few months had aged him in ways that time alone could not accomplish. He sat in the chair beside my bed, and he cried, really cried, the kind of crying that shakes your whole body and leaves you gasping for air. He said he was sorry. He said he had made a terrible mistake. He said he wished he could take it all back. Every word, every decision, every moment of cruelty and dismissal. And here is the twist that no one saw coming, the revelation that changes the entire shape of this story. I looked at my son, at this man I had given life to and raised and loved with every atom of my being, and I did not recognize him, not because of the Alzheimer's, not because my memory had finally failed me so completely that I could not recall my own child's face, but because in that moment, with absolute clarity, I saw him for exactly who he had chosen to become, a stranger. Someone who loved the idea of being a good son more than he actually loved his mother. Someone who wanted the appearance of family without the messy reality of it. Someone who was crying now, not because he had hurt me, but because he was finally facing the consequences of his choices, and he did not like the way they made him feel about himself. I told him I forgave him. I said the words he needed to hear because I am dying, and there is no point in carrying bitterness into whatever comes next. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, even for someone whose brain specializes in letting things slip away. Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. Forgiveness is not an eraser that makes the pain disappear, or a magic wand that restores what has been broken. Forgiveness is simply a choice to stop letting someone else's failures consume what little time you have left. He asked if he could do anything for me, if there was anything I needed, and I almost laughed because the irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. What I needed was for him to show up 6 months ago. What I needed was for him to see me as a person instead of a problem. What I needed was for him to love me enough to be uncomfortable, to be embarrassed, to let his perfect wedding photos include his imperfect mother. But it is too late for any of that now. Too late for do-overs and second chances and the fantasy that people fundamentally change when confronted with mortality. So I told him the truth. I told him that I had already made arrangements for everything. My will was updated. My final wishes were documented. The funeral home had been contacted and paid in advance. I had done it all myself, or rather I had done it with the help of my lawyer and the hospice social worker who understood that I needed to maintain control over the only things I still could control. I told him he did not need to do anything except live with his choices, and maybe, if he ever has children of his own, remember this moment and choose differently when his turn comes to care for an aging parent who is no longer convenient or easy or socially acceptable. He visits every day now. He sits beside my bed and holds my hand and tells me stories about his life, his marriage, his plans for the future. Sometimes I listen, and sometimes I drift away to other places. Other times, other versions of myself that still exist somewhere in the tangled mess of neurons that used to be my mind. He brings Sarah with him sometimes, and she is kind to me in that careful way people are kind to the dying, with a gentleness that feels like pity wrapped in good intentions. They are trying, I can see that, but trying now feels like too little too late, like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needed stitches months ago. Yesterday, Daniel brought our old photo albums, the ones I kept in the hall closet of the house I sold 2 years ago when living alone became too dangerous. He turned the pages slowly, pointing out pictures of us when he was small, me pushing him on a swing, him blowing out birthday candles, the two of us at the beach with his father who has been gone for so long that sometimes I forget what his voice sounded like. Daniel cried looking at those photos, and he said he could not believe he had wanted to exclude me from his wedding photos, could not understand how he had been so cruel, so thoughtless, so completely blind to what actually mattered. And I wanted to tell him that the photos were never the point. The point was that he decided I was not worth the risk of embarrassment. The point was that he chose his comfort over my dignity. The point was that when I needed him to see me, really see me, he looked away. But my words are getting harder to find now, slipping through my fingers like water, and by the time I organize my thoughts enough to speak them out loud, the moment has usually passed, and we are talking about something else entirely, or not talking at all, just sitting in the kind of silence that grows between people who love each other, but cannot figure out how to bridge the distance that has opened up between them. The nurses tell me I probably have a few weeks left, maybe less. The cancer has spread everywhere now, eating away at my lungs and my liver and my bones, racing the Alzheimer's to see which one will kill me first. I find a strange comfort in knowing that I will die with at least some of my memories intact, that I will not fade away completely into the fog before the end comes. I will remember my husband's laugh and my son's first steps, and the feeling of accomplishment I had when I finally paid off my mortgage after 25 years of scrimping and saving. I will remember the good parts, the beautiful parts, even if I also remember the painful parts, the betrayal, the moment I realized that my son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a burden. If you are still watching, if you have made it this far through this story, I want to thank you. Thank you for bearing witness. Thank you for letting me exist fully in all my complexity and mess and anger and grief. Thank you for not turning away when the story got uncomfortable or difficult, or when I stopped being a sympathetic character and became someone who took revenge, who withdrew money and changed her will and refused to forgive easily. Thank you for understanding that people with Alzheimer's are not saints or angels or noble sufferers, but human beings with the same capacity for hurt and anger and the need for justice that everyone else has. The money I withdrew from the bank, the money that left Daniel scrambling to cover his wedding expenses, I donated most of it to an Alzheimer's research foundation. The rest I used to pay for this hospice care, to make sure I could die with dignity in a place where people treat me like I matter even on days when I cannot remember my own name. It felt like the right choice, the only choice, a way of taking something that was meant to celebrate my exclusion and transforming it into something that might help other people who are fighting this same battle. Daniel will inherit nothing when I die. He will get the wedding photos he wanted so badly, the perfect images without his imperfect mother cluttering up the frame. But he will not get the house or the savings or the life insurance payout he was probably counting on to fund his future. He will get the knowledge that his mother loved him enough to give him everything, and he will have to live with the knowledge that he did not love her enough to include her in the one day that mattered most to him. That is his inheritance. That is what I am leaving behind. The twist in this story is not that I am dying. The twist is not that my son came back too late to make things right. The twist is that even now, even at the end, even with all the anger and hurt and disappointment that sits between us like a third presence in this hospice room, I still love him. I still love him with the same fierce protective love I felt the first time I held him in my arms. I still love him enough to forgive him, even though forgiveness does not erase what happened or make it okay. I still love him enough to hope that he learns something from this, that he becomes a better person, that he treats the people in his life with more kindness and consideration than he treated me in my final year. But love is not enough. That is the thing they do not tell you in fairy tales and love songs and all the stories about mothers and sons and the bonds that are supposed to be unbreakable. Love is not enough when it is one-sided. Love is not enough when it does not include respect. Love is not enough when the person you love sees you as less than human because your brain is not working the way it used to work. Love is not enough to bridge the gap between who I needed him to be and who he actually was when it mattered most. So here I am at the end of my story, at the end of my life, and I want you to know that I do not regret any of it. Not the money I withdrew, not the will I changed, not the distance I put between myself and my son when he showed me that his love had conditions I could not meet. I do not regret standing up for myself, even when it was hard, even when it cost me the relationship I valued most in the world, even when it meant I would die estranged from the child I carried in my body for 9 months and in my heart for 72 years. What I do regret is that it took this disease, took dying, took hitting absolute rock bottom, for me to finally understand that I deserved better. I deserved to be included. I deserved to be valued. I deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of whether my brain was functioning properly or not. And if my story helps even one person understand that they deserve better too, if it helps one person stand up for themselves before it is too late, if it helps one family have the difficult conversations before resentment and hurt build up into something that cannot be repaired, then maybe sharing it was worth it. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that people are more than their diagnoses. Subscribe if you believe that worth is inherent, not earned. Subscribe if you believe that the way we treat our most vulnerable says everything about who we are as a society. Subscribe if you want to be part of a community that refuses to look away when things get difficult, that shows up for the messy parts, that values people all the way to the end, and not just when they are convenient or easy or able to reciprocate. My name is Margaret Ann Foster, and I am 72 years old, and I am dying of cancer and Alzheimer's disease, and I am still here. I still matter. My story matters. Your story matters. And no disease or diagnosis or degradation of mental capacity can ever take that away from us. Remember that. Hold on to it. And when someone tries to tell you otherwise, when someone tries to exclude you or dismiss you or treat you like you are already gone, stand up for yourself the way I wish I had stood up for myself sooner. This is my final message, my last testimony, my way of telling the world that I existed and I mattered and I refuse to disappear quietly. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being here at the end of a story that did not turn out the way anyone hoped, but turned out the way it needed to. I am at peace with that. I hope you can be too.